I made a mirror. This video is sponsored by MLCS Woodworking. They make this really cool clamp that helped me clamp up this octagon-shaped mirror, so stick around to see how I did it. I made this whole frame using scraps that I had lying around. These are all just pine pieces, probably from 2x4s or something like that, and I ripped them all to be 1 inch square. In order for the mirror to sit in the frame, I'm going to create a rabbet on the inside, on the back. I'm going to do this on a router table, but don't worry if you don't have a router table. You could do this with a table saw, you could do this with a handheld router, you could do it with a bunch of other tools. So I have a router table, so I'm going to use it, and I'm also going to use this rabbeting bit from MLCS. It has a bunch of these different bearings so you could change the size. It's really easy to use, it's just one pass, and I like doing it before assembly, but you could do it after assembly if you want. So don't get discouraged if you don't have a router table. You could still make this with other tools, so let's do it. The reason why I like doing this on the router table is because it's just one pass. You could do this on the table saw also, but then you have to make 2 passes. It's a little bit more difficult. I also like doing it before assembly so I don't have to worry about chiseling any corners. Since I am awful at math, I needed an easy way to figure out how to cut the angles. This is not a regular octagon, it is elongated, so the angles are a bit off. So I printed out a to scale copy of the actual frame, and there are 2 angles that I have to worry about here. So what I'm going to do is take this angle finder and line it up on the paper as a template, and then take the angle finder over to my miter saw, and that way I have the perfect angle without having to do any math or any measuring. So let's get at it. Anyone else really awful at math? So I took the angle finder and I lined it up on the template, locked it in place, and then took it to the miter saw, and I had the correct angle. Before I made my cuts, I put a backer board against the miter saw and I made a cut in it. And what this does, it makes a line so that you know exactly where to line up your piece for the cut, and it also prevents any tear out at the back. And the angle was dead on perfect. I was super happy. Moving right along, I measured for the rest of the cuts, and I used a scrap piece that had an angle on it as a stop block, and then made the rest of the cuts. Only I forgot to change the angle on the other side, so I had to make some new pieces and cut them again. This time I remembered to change the angle, and I had to keep track of the 2 left side pieces and the 2 right side pieces. I set the miter saw to the correct angle and then cut away. All the pieces are cut and ready for assembly, and I'm going to use this really cool clamp from MLCS. It's a corner clamp, and it comes with 4 of these corners, but you can add on extra so I could glue up this octagon. Let's do it. I struggled a little bit trying to get on the extra corner pieces. Then I just realized I needed some extra force, and then it was really easy to put on. I was also concerned that the band wasn't going to be big enough because this frame is pretty big, but there was a lot of room left over, and what's really cool about the band is that it's metal, so it's really, really strong, but you also have to be really careful not to hurt yourself on the metal. When laying out the pieces, I had to be careful to put the short side pieces in the right spot because it had 2 different angles on it, and this was the piece that I had messed up before when I cut the wrong angle. And now it's all ready for glue. I decided to use type on 3 because I wanted the extra working time. I thought that I was going to need it, but in the end, I did not need it. This glue up went super quick, and this clamps definitely helped with that. After every time I tightened down on the clamp, I just went around to check that everything was nice and even and level. And when it's nice and tight, you can make some music. I set it up to dry overnight and then took the clamp off the next day. It's really easy to just wrap the band back into that little container thing, and then I put it away. Since I glued up the frame at the end grain, it's really not such a strong joint, and I want to reinforce it. If you want to reinforce it, you can use brad nails, screws, whatever you like. I'm going to use some splines. And in order to cut the slots for the splines, I'm going to use a slot cutting bit. The problem here is that the slot cutting bit that I have is 1/2 inch collet for a 1/2 inch collet, and my 1/2 inch router is for my router table. And when I was installing my router into my router table base plate, I stripped the screw, so can't take it out. It's stuck there forever. This is a little bit unorthodox, but I think it should work, so let's do it. So it works, and it's just like using a regular base plate, just a little bit heavier. And then I tested to see if the spline was gonna fit. So this spline happened to have come from my scrap bin, and it was the perfect size, which was awesome. So I just moved right along, clamping down a fence that was a good distance away from the frame, and then I just cut away. After all the slots were cut, I got to gluing in the splines. I put glue in the slot and on the spline and then pushed it into place. And after it was in place, I think this is called a Dozuki saw. I used that to cut it to its final size. And repeated the same thing for the other 7 corners of the octagon. After the glue dried, I used this pull saw to cut them free. I'm really enjoying using my hand tools a little bit more. I really want to get better at using them because this was so fast to do. I think cutting each one away was maybe a minute to cut them away, probably less than that. And setting up a power tool takes way longer than that. Even though you think it's faster, these hand tools are way faster. So if you have any hand tool recommendations, I would love to hear them. After cutting them free, I just had to sand it to clean it up a little bit, and now the frame is all ready to be finished. I think this blind looks really cool. Too bad I'm going to be painting it. I decided to paint it black because I really wanted it to look like metal. What do you guys think about my new shirts? I'm kind of really excited about them. Anyway, after the paint dried, I worked on putting on the hooks. I'm using these D-rings. I used a straight edge with a ruler to make sure I was putting them on the same spot on both sides. Anytime I pre-drill holes for something like a hinge or something like this, I use a VIX bit, which is a self-centering drill bit. Using a bit like this ensures that your pre-drilled hole is perfectly centered. So I pre-drilled for the D-rings on both sides and then got to attaching the mirror. I decided to use this contact adhesive because it says it bonds glass and wood. So I spread it around the inside edges of the rabbit and then just placed the mirror down. I was scared to cut the mirror myself, so I had a company cut it for me, but that ended up actually being a mistake and causing more problems, so next time I will attempt to cut mirror myself. And because I was worried that the adhesive wasn't going to be strong enough because it was painted, I decided to use these push points. You just push them into place with a putty knife, and it holds the glass in place. After attaching the D-rings, I put on the picture frame wire. This one's actually really heavy duty and it's really thick. You do not need one this thick. I'm going to put a link to the video that I watched that taught me how to do this. It's really simple to do. You just make a slip knot and then wrap the wire around. I'm going to be hanging this on 2 hooks that are spaced 12 inches apart. So I took a scrap that was cut to 12 inches, lifted up on the wire, and then measured to the top of the frame. Then took that measurement to the wall, and then used the scrap again to mark the locations where the 2 hooks are going to go. These laser level measuring tools were really helpful in making sure this was perfectly level and even. Hanging up something heavy on a wall, if you can find your studs, is really easy, but the studs are not in the right location where I want to put this mirror. So you can use these like picture hanging hooks, and this is rated for 200 pounds, which is really heavy. And this mirror, I weighed it, it's actually 30 pounds. So this would be like overkill for something like this, but it would hold it up really well. You can also use something like a toggle bolt. So this toggle bolt, you screw it into the wall and it holds it securely into place. I'm actually going to use this only because my friend invented it, and I think it's super cool to use something that your friend invented, but hooks like this are totally fine. If you're using conventional picture hanging hooks, you do not need to drill into the wall like this, but because I'm using the toggle bolts, I have to drill a hole in the wall. In order to hang the frame, I added this really large fender washer and a hook. So here's my friend's invention, the T-shaped driver. Normally with toggle bolts, you need to pull back with one hand and then drill to tighten with the other hand. But with this T-shaped driver, it fits into a slot in the bolt that actually pulls the bolt and it tightens at the same time. So I think it's pretty cool. And then the moment of truth, I put the mirror onto the hooks and everything looked really great. I just had to make some minor adjustments to make sure that the frame was all level, and then it was done. Well, it's up and complete, and I'm super happy with how it came out. I love how modern it is. I was really thinking that I wanted to make the frame in metal, but I don't know how to weld and I don't know how to do any metal work. But I think I achieved the same look by making it thin and painting it black. If you're a metal worker, I think this frame would look killer in metal. The only lesson that I learned on this one and what I would do differently next time, I would have to cut the mirror myself. That ended up causing problems that I hired it out. I'm not going to go into details, but in the end, it's always best to DIY, and I should have just cut it myself. So next time around, I'm going to be cutting my own mirrors. So thank you again to MLCS for sponsoring this video. Definitely go check out that clamp. It's really cool. And thank you again for watching. I will see you on the next one. And I tried to get some good finished pictures of the frame and the mirror, but it's really hard to take pictures of a mirror. This was the best I got. So thank you again for watching. You could reinforce the joints with brad nail screws, whatever you want. I am going to use some, what am I going to use? Splines. I'm going to use splines. Okay.